So now we come to the part I probably enjoy the most, doing these characters and illustrations, adding the shadows. Adding the shadows adds so much dimensionality and volume to the characters and just bring them really out. So the way I approach it, as you can see, I create a new layer on top of the other layer. I clip it to the layer and I set it to multiply. And for this character, I use a pastel brush with full opacity, and I choose kind of an very bright purplish lavender tone, and I just draw in the first it's kind of the occlusion shadows. So I'm adding the shadows into 2 steps. So the first is the occlusion shadows for every color layer I have. An occlusion is basically where 2 surfaces touch each other, and there won't be any light hitting. So, and I put this kind of everywhere where there are some kind of overlaps, and just to create a bit of more depth. And I still have the light source in mind, which in this case is the magical hand of the character. So I basically try to put the shadow on the lower right corner of the single objects. And I do this for all the color layers before I go to the next step. So this approach is kind of a bit of a simplified approach of placing the shadows. Actually, it's not only the occlusion shadow where 2 surfaces touch. It's like I'm on these layers I also put the cast shadows. So from objects that are hit by the light source directly, and cast a shadow on the surfaces underneath. So it's kind of a mix. And the process is pretty straightforward for all the color layers. And as you can see, I don't name my layers now. I just mark them as blue. So all the blue layers are going to be my first shadow layer, and the secondary shadow is going to be in purple later on. So once I'm done with all the first shadows, I make another shadow layer on top of the other shadow layer. So you can see in the layers now, this is marked the purple one. And I take a big textured brush, set the layer on multiply, and pick a purplish lavender tone. And now I just try to kind of paint in some volumes. So I take an eraser with the same structure, and then I just paint in shadowy parts and erase a bit of them if they are too much. And this is pretty much like going back and forth and trying to create a bit more volume and structure. And I think about the light source and how it affects the different elements. So for example, this bell is getting shadow from the top, so the lower part is kind of in the shadow, and the part where it's rounded, there's going to be like a soft edge. So this approach just creates a bit more volume. And sometimes I use the lasso tool just to select parts I want to have more control for the shadow. For example, like I want to separate this one bell and create a shadow side there. So I just make a quick selection. And you can really take just your time with this process and paint on each part separately. Every time on a new layer, just make it to multiply, so you have the maximum control over it. And I think the most important thing about this process is to really keep the light source in mind, to know where your light is coming from and how it's affecting the volumes of the objects. So always try to think of the volumes and the planes. If you are unsure, just create a layer on top and draw the planes in if you want to help you with the imagination of the volume. And if you want, you can always just sketch in your light source, just make like an arrow coming from top left, so you know, okay, my light is coming from top left, so everything down right has to be kind of in the shadow. And that's pretty much all there is to the shadows. So by this point you should have like the occlusion and cast shadows and some volumetric shadows or for each the colors and layers. And yeah, that's that. So in the next episode we're going to add some lights, and then we are almost there.